Miss Vera-Ellen. Vera-Ellen.
Rosemary Clooney remembered Vera-Ellen as more than just her co-star in White Christmas.
It was funny because I had an absolute familial feeling for Vera because I understood that singing together, that working together. That was important. That worked for me. Vera and I couldn't have been more different from each other. She was disciplined. I have been told by excellent dancers and choreographers that she was the best dancer that was ever at Metro. She was patient with me. I would make mistakes, and I felt very inadequate, and indeed I was. There was one thing, though, that kind of evened out the situation, and that is the fact that she couldn't sing, so that her voice was dubbed. If they could have dubbed my dancing now, we would have had a perfect picture.
The two actresses were very different, but Clooney developed an almost familial feeling toward Vera and deeply respected her incredible talent. While Vera-Ellen was considered one of MGM's finest dancers, Clooney openly admitted that she often felt inadequate beside her, and revealed the one thing that helped even the score.
1968. What happened?
I had a nervous breakdown. The beginning of 1968, I started traveling very hard. I was running from country to country. I was everywhere that year.
Cincinnati, Ohio, was the birthplace of Vera-Ellen, born Vera-Ellen Rove, on February 16, 1921. Long before Hollywood came calling, she was just a Midwestern girl with a gift for movement, a gift that would eventually make her one of the most celebrated dancers of her era, admired for her grace, glamour, and technical brilliance. Getting there, though, took years of grit. Dance found her early. Her parents, Martin and Alma Rowe, noticed her talent and supported it, pushing her to chase opportunities beyond their hometown. By age 10, she was already collecting wins at local dance contests, charming crowds with a natural elegance that seemed well beyond her years. That promise earned her a spot at Cincinnati's respected Hessler Dance Studio, a turning point that shaped everything that followed. There, she sharpened her craft across disciplines like ballet and tap, gradually forming the distinctive movement style she'd later bring to Hollywood. Cincinnati, though, couldn't contain her ambition. In her mid-teens, she won a spot on Major Bose's Amateur Hour, the era's biggest talent scouting radio program, and used that exposure to launch herself into professional dance, touring New York theaters, and even joining the famed Rockettes at Radio City Music Hall before she'd finished her teens. Chasing the idea of seeing her name in lights, she headed for New York City at just 18 years old, convinced that's where her future was waiting. She didn't wait long to prove herself right. Her Broadway debut came in 1939 with Very Warm for May, a small role but an important first step. The real breakthrough arrived in 1942, when she landed a part in By Jupiter, a Broadway smash that put her talent on full display and drew serious critical attention. That success became her launchpad into film. Broadway was only the beginning. Producer Samuel Goldwyn spotted her and brought her to Hollywood, and in 1945 she made her film debut opposite Danny Kaye in Wonder Man, followed a year later by another Kaye vehicle, The Kid from Brooklyn. Both were hits, and audiences quickly warmed to her fresh-faced charm. By 1948, she had signed with MGM, the studio synonymous with the movie musical, and it was there that her career truly took flight. Her partnership with Gene Kelly became one of the defining collaborations of her career. In Words and Music that same year, the two performed the Slaughter on 10th Avenue number, a showcase so striking it's still remembered as one of the era's great film dance sequences. A year later, she and Kelly reunited for On the Town, playing the character Miss Turnstiles opposite his sailor on shore leave, widely considered the high point of her dancing on film. She would go on to partner with Fred Astaire in Three Little Words and The Belle of New York, and with Donald O'Connor in Call Me Madam, rounding out a resume that paired her with essentially every major male dancer of Hollywood's musical age. What makes her story especially interesting is how she built stardom almost entirely through physical performance rather than dialogue. In an industry that prized the spoken word nearly as much as visual artistry, Vera-Ellen stood out as proof that movement alone could carry a career. Despite being a genuine A-list name during Hollywood's golden age, audiences rarely heard her actual speaking or singing voice on screen, a curious detail that says a lot about the industry pressures and personal choices behind it, and one that would matter enormously when she teamed up with Rosemary Clooney years later. That bond between the two women took root on the set of White Christmas in 1954, a film that would go on to become a holiday staple watched by generations. On screen, Clooney and Vera-Ellen played sisters, Betty and Judy Haynes, a pair of singing and dancing performers, swept up in Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye's plan to save an old Army general's failing Vermont inn. In front of the cameras, the two had an easy rapport, trading comedic beats and sharing musical numbers, including the now iconic Sisters duet that still hold up decades later. Clooney liked to joke in later years about just how mismatched their two skill sets actually were. She was a singer who couldn't dance much, paired with a dancer who couldn't really sing. But it was what happened away from the cameras that stuck with Clooney most, the quiet moments that revealed who Vera-Ellen really was beneath the polish and precision she brought to every performance. Few people watching White Christmas today realize how close it came to looking completely different. Paramount had been kicking the idea around since the late 1940s, hoping to reunite Bing Crosby with Fred Astaire, his co-star from Holiday Inn and Blue Skies, for a third Irving Berlin holiday musical. Astaire read the script and passed, unhappy with the material and ready to step back from movie musicals for a while. The studio then turned to Donald O'Connor, fresh off his star turn in Singin' in the Rain, and the pairing made sense on paper. O'Connor and Vera-Ellen had already danced together to great effect in Call Me Madam, and executives figured that chemistry would translate straight into the new picture. Costumes were fitted, numbers were rehearsed, and production was set to begin. Then, just before filming started, O'Connor fell seriously ill after working alongside Francis the Mule on an unrelated project, and he had to withdraw. With the start date bearing down on them, Paramount scrambled and landed on Danny Kaye. Kaye knew he had the leverage and asked for an enormous fee, along with a cut of the film's earnings, fully expecting the studio to balk. They didn't. He signed on, and the role that almost went to two other performers ended up defining one of his most beloved screen turns. That kind of last-minute reshuffling extended to smaller moments, too. According to Clooney, the now famous Sisters bit, performed by Crosby and Kaye, the two men clowning around with fans, lip-syncing the number in Betty and Judy's style, wasn't in the script at all. It grew out of the two stars goofing off between takes, and director Michael Curtis liked it enough to put it on film. It's since become one of the most quoted scenes from the entire movie, even though nobody planned it. The production carried real technical weight as well. White Christmas was the first film released using Paramount's Vista Vision process, a widescreen format that didn't just stretch the picture, but used a larger negative to capture a sharper, cleaner image than the standard techniques of the day. Shot on that format, and in Technicolor, the film was positioned as a showcase for what the studio's new technology could do, and audiences responded. It opened in the fall of 1954 and went on to become the highest-grossing release of the year in North America. That combination of star power, technical novelty, and Irving Berlin's songbook is a large part of why it still airs every holiday season more than 70 years later. For Vera-Ellen, the shifting cast list meant her intended screen partner changed twice before the cameras ever rolled. The number "The best things happen while you're dancing" had reportedly been shaped with Astaire's style in mind, and some of the choreography built around John Brascia's character was thought to have been designed with him in mind as well. Kay adapted to it capably, and his numbers with Vera-Ellen, full of playful energy rather than Astaire's cool precision, ended up giving the film a different, looser charm than it might have had with its originally planned leading man. It's a reminder that some of the qualities audiences now associate most strongly with White Christmas were never actually part of the original plan. They were the result of a production that kept adjusting on the fly, and, more than once, landed on something better than what it had first intended. By her own account, Clooney never felt like she was on equal footing with Vera-Ellen when it came to sheer dance ability. Vera-Ellen had spent a lifetime perfecting her craft, and it showed in every step, clean, controlled, effortless, in a way that took most performers years of grueling work to even approach. Standing next to that kind of precision, Clooney admitted she sometimes felt like she was scrambling just to keep pace. But there was one thing that made the gap feel smaller, and it wasn't about matching Vera-Ellen's technique. It was something far more personal. According to Clooney, Vera-Ellen had a way of making the people around her feel like equals, regardless of skill level. She wasn't cold or distant the way some stars at her level could be. She was warm, encouraging, generous with her time, the kind of co-star who made others better simply by being present. That, more than any dance lesson, was what closed the distance between them. Clooney's own generosity toward Vera-Ellen went just as deep, and one behind-the-scenes decision proved just how far she was willing to go for her. Because Vera-Ellen's singing voice rarely made it to the screen in her own films, it needed to be dubbed for White Christmas, too, a common practice for dancers whose vocal range didn't match the demands of a film score. The studio's original plan was to bring in singer Gloria Wood for the job. But Clooney stepped in. Rather than stay out of a decision that wasn't technically hers to make, Clooney pushed to have the role given to her own friend, Trudy Stevens, instead. It was a quiet gesture, but a telling one. Clooney wasn't just going through the motions of a professional courtesy. She was actively shaping the production to make sure someone she trusted and someone she believed would serve Vera-Ellen well ended up handling her voice for the film. The switch went through, and Stevens became Vera-Ellen's vocal double for every song in White Christmas. It's a detail that's been misremembered over the years. Some accounts even claimed Clooney dubbed Vera-Ellen's voice herself, essentially duetting with her own vocals in numbers like Sisters. That wasn't the case. But the real story, once untangled, says something more meaningful than the myth ever did. Clooney's care for Vera-Ellen wasn't just sentimental. It showed up in the choices she made when she had the power to make them. White Christmas would prove to be one of Vera-Ellen's last major roles. She made only a handful of films across her entire career, but by the late 1950s, the kind of splashy movie musical that had built her stardom was falling out of fashion, and her own path in Hollywood was narrowing along with it. She retired from film after 1957's Let's Be Happy, taking occasional television spots and even headlining a Las Vegas dance revue before stepping away from performing almost entirely by the early 1960s. Behind the glamour, Vera-Ellen was quietly struggling. In an era when eating disorders were barely understood, let alone discussed, she battled her health privately for years, a strain that colleagues sometimes noticed but rarely spoke about publicly at the time. Her personal life carried its own heartbreak. After 2 marriages, she gave birth to her only child in 1963, a daughter who tragically died just months later. Vera-Ellen largely withdrew from public life afterward, and she passed away in 1981. Given all of that, the warmth Rosemary Clooney described takes on even more weight. The Vera-Ellen who showed up on the White Christmas set, generous, encouraging, quick to make her co-stars feel like equals, was carrying more than audiences, or even some of her colleagues, ever knew. That Clooney chose to fight for her friend to handle Vera-Ellen's voice in the film wasn't just a nice gesture between co-stars. It was a small act of loyalty toward someone whose life, on and off screen, deserved far more grace than history often gave her. The woman Clooney fought to bring onto the project, Trudy Stevens, is almost a footnote in most retellings of this story, which is a shame because her own path to that recording booth says something about how invisible this kind of work usually was. Born Gertrude Ewan, she'd built a career as a working dubbing vocalist years before White Christmas, lending her voice to other actresses who couldn't quite hit the notes a script demanded. She'd already stood in for Elizabeth Scott on a number in the 1950 picture Dark City, among other assignments most audiences never knew existed. She was married at the time to bandleader Dick Stabile, which is why some later reference books list her under the name Trudy Stabile rather than her stage name, and it's part of why the historical record around her got muddled enough that Clooney's own contribution to the casting sometimes vanished from the story entirely. Once her marriage to Stabile ended, she kept working, building a second career as a nightclub singer under her married name across Las Vegas, Lake Tahoe, and Palm Springs. The kind of steady, largely unglamorous circuit work that rarely gets remembered decades later, even by people who've hummed her uncredited vocals every December without realizing it. What Stevens actually recorded for the film amounted to 5 separate songs, each one folded seamlessly under Vera-Ellen's on-screen performance so that audiences would never notice the seam. It's worth pointing out, too, that Vera-Ellen wasn't entirely silent throughout the picture. There's a brief moment near a train station as the stars reprise the opening bars of Snow, where her actual speaking and singing voice slips through, unguarded by any double. It's such a small sliver of screen time that most viewers never register it as anything unusual, but it's oddly moving once you know to listen for it. A fleeting glimpse of the real voice behind a career built almost entirely on the assumption that audiences didn't need to hear it. The dubbing arrangement created an odd complication once the studio tried to capitalize on the film's soundtrack. Clooney was under contract to Columbia Records at the time, while Decca controlled the rights to the music from the picture itself, and the two labels couldn't agree on a single official release. Rather than resolve it, both companies simply put out their own separate versions of the soundtrack, each drawing from different recordings of the same songs, a strange bit of corporate tangling that meant even the film's music carried two competing legacies almost from the moment it hit theaters, in much the same way its story of who sang what has been quietly tangled and untangled by biographers and fans ever since. None of this messiness dimmed the film's reception when it finally reached audiences. Critics at the time responded warmly to the whole cast working together, praising Irving Berlin's score and the easy chemistry among the 4 leads alongside supporting players like Dean Jagger and Mary Wicks, and singling out, more than once, the sheer physical energy John Brascia and Vera-Ellen brought to the dance sequences built around them. That kind of contemporary praise has only deepened with time. White Christmas has become one of the small handful of mid-century movie musicals that never really left television schedules, airing on some network or streaming service every holiday season for more than 70 years running, introducing new generations to songs, jokes, and dance numbers that were never expected to still matter this far into the future. That kind of longevity has a way of reshaping how people understand a film's history. Watched today, mostly as a comfort viewing tradition rather than a fresh release, it's easy to assume everything on screen unfolded exactly as planned. a tidy, polished holiday confection built without friction. The truth, as it turns out, was far messier. A leading man cast twice before the right one stuck. A choreographer designing routines for a star who never showed up. A singing voice quietly handed off between 3 different women before the credits rolled, and 2 record labels unable to agree on whose soundtrack even counted as official. None of that messiness made it into the finished picture, which is precisely the point. It took real behind-the-scenes labor, much of it uncredited or barely remembered, to make something feel that effortless. Rosemary Clooney's decision to advocate for Trudy Stevens fits into that larger pattern in a way that's easy to overlook. It wasn't a decision that changed the shape of the film, and it's not the kind of story that gets its own chapter in most retrospectives. But it was one small choice, made by someone with just enough influence to make it, on behalf of 2 people, her friend Trudy and her co-star Vera-Ellen, who otherwise might never have crossed paths in quite the same way. Decades later, long after both women had passed and long after most of the people who worked on that film were gone too, it's one of the few decisions from that production that still reads as an act of genuine care rather than studio calculation. In a movie remembered mostly for its snow, its songs, and its sentimentality, that quiet bit of loyalty behind the scenes might be the most honest moment of all. So the next time White Christmas comes on and Betty and Judy step into Sisters, it's worth remembering there was a real sisterhood behind it too, one built quietly, off-camera, by a woman who chose to look out for her friend when it mattered most.